I'm gonna start assembling. I'm gonna mount the flight controller. I've got a battery strap. I didn't use the one that came with MQC. I'm gonna use this one from Thrust. It's stitched, and it's so heavy duty. These things are basically unbreakable. So that's what I'm gonna use. I'm planning that it's going to go under the flight controller like that, and then it'll go around my battery and connect back to itself. So in anticipation of that, what I did is I took a file and I just smoothed those edges out a little bit. I ran it underwater and filed it just to smooth the edge, so hopefully that won't cut the flight controller or the battery strap as I'm, after I connect and disconnect and do all that. So anyways, that's some prep I did for it. Now this, the way I've got this set up is my receiver is going to sit on top of my flight controller. So what I'm going to do is take some string and I'm just going to wrap it around. That's just going to secure that to the flight controller, and then I'll take a little hot glue and just glue the string to the thing. So to the receiver, it's not going to be super tight, but it's not going to go anywhere either. I mean, this doesn't have to be rock solid, so that's just the way I do it, and that's what I'm going to do. So I will show some pictures after I get it mounted. I'll sort of route the wires around the standoffs, and then I'll come back when I get it assembled. All right, so just got some string wrapped around my receiver. Just going to pull it tight and hit it with a little glue. Make sure that the bind button is pointing up. I just had to pull my hot glue off and redo it because, like a dum-dum, I put it on upside down. I'm just going to tap it with a little hot glue there, and that'll hold the string in place and hold the receiver on. So you can see it's just a touch loose, but it still gives it a little room to move in case I need to reposition it a little bit. So it's going to sit just like that. Okay. So another thing that I haven't mentioned yet is when I mount this flight controller on the standoffs, I'm going to be soft mounting it, and I'm going to use some of these little rubber gaskets that I just made. I just took some flexible fuel hose tubing. You probably get that at any auto parts store, and I just use an X-Acto knife and just cut some little gaskets or some little washers that will mount below or between the flight controller and the plastic standoff. Somewhat laid out. I've got all my wires going out the back for ESCs 1 and 3, 2, 4. Not quite sure if they'll go in front of the pole, in front of that standoff, or behind it. I'm going to have to put the camera and the bracket in, dry fit that, and see where those wires are going to fit. But I'll do that in just a second. Right now I'm just about to slide the little rubber washers in here, or gaskets, and just put some plastic screws in through the top and just secure the flight controller now. I've got them secured, little rubber gaskets between the plastic screws I got in my little Banggood kit and the flight controller. So hopefully that's a soft enough mount that it won't give me problems later. Got all my wires coming out the back, so when I get my ESCs here, I can gauge those off and get them soldered on. Next step, I'm going to drop the camera in here and figure out where to route my front wires. I'm going to be running them between the standoff and the flight controller and directly behind the camera bracket and then I'll pull them forward and come out to my ESC like this. Little gap, or a little twist in the cable, and then they'll just run right along like that. So that's how I'm going to run those front cables. Okay, on the rear of the frame, I'm going to keep with the theme of tucking them back and going between the standoffs. So the rear, sorry. So that's the rear, the frame. So I'm coming back between the standoffs, and then I'll run them along the arm. So it'll look like that. The connection wire that's coming from my VTX has a 4-wire system. Okay? My camera takes 3 pins. Okay. So I'm going to take the wiring harness that my camera came with. I will flip the little tab in the harness, pull out the wire, do the same on the harness from the VTX, and I will put the correct wire into the correct spot from the camera harness, so that that little 3-position pico blade or whatever connector it is it'll connect to my camera from my VTX. So I'm going to do that now. And these connectors, it probably won't focus. There's little tabs here, and I just use one of these dental tools with a real fine tip on it. And so if you lift that tab, the wire will just slide out. And so I've already depinned the stock connector that comes with the TBS Unify, and you can see these connectors right here. That's what they look like. So I'm just going to take these and put them into the stock connector that come with the RunCam Swift in the right order, and it's video ground voltage when I'm looking at this from inside to out. So video ground voltage. These RunCam Swifts come with a 2-pin OSD port next to where the video, ground, and power plug in, and it looks like this. So it comes with a little 2-pin connector that you plug in, and then this little dongle allows you to navigate the menu system and do things like your title and your name and all that stuff. What I do is I will generally cut that off, and then I make a little adapter that looks like this. Okay, so then I plug that into the camera, and I just leave it plugged in all the time. So I'll plug that in, and then I'll usually tuck that little wire back under the flight controller or something. So the only thing sticking out is this little guy, the other half of it. And then you just take your dongle that you've already cut off, and you just put in something like that with a couple of male pins sticking out of it. So then all you have to do is just grab this. If you're in the field and this is sticking out or taped onto the side of the arm or something like that, you just come up to it, plug into it, and you can adjust all of your camera settings in the field without having to dismantle your entire quad. Because when this camera goes in, that little plug is really hidden back in there, and you can't quite get to it without taking the top part of without taking the top plate off of your quad and pulling the camera out. So anyways, that's what I'm going to do right now. Got the one little adapter built, and it's tucked in. It's tucked in behind there, and probably what I'll do is just hot glue hot glue that to the frame, tucked right back in there, something like that, or something. It's just where it's kind of out of the way. And then I just walk up with my adapter. I mean, I just took one of those male version of that, and I just soldered it on and hot glued it so it stays in place. So I just show up and just plug that into the little port, and I can configure my camera in the field. Okay. I put the low SD connector on there, drop the camera in, put the top plate on, put the Yi mounting bracket on, lightly secured that. So then I ran my receiver antennas up through the plate here, and then I've attached the VTX to the back printed 3D printed part, and then my antenna just does a little curly Q and comes up through the top plate. So that's how it's going to mount. And then the only thing left to do is ESCs and motors, basically. Put on my my LED buzzer combo, and I should be ready to rock. So okay, that's it for now. Alright, so I just got my new DYS XSD 20 amps ESCs in. I'm gonna pull the heat shrink off of these that came with them. I'm going to desolder the cables because I've already ran my own cables from the flight controller, and then I'm going to basically solder them onto the frame to the cables that I've already ran. So I'm going to do that now. For this part, I'm going to just set the ESC down there about where I think it's going to go. I've already put a motor up here. Obviously, I have plenty of motor cable. So then, as it's sitting there, I'm going to just sort of pull the wires around one at a time where I think they're going to go, and I'm going to leave myself a little bit of slack on each side, on the motor side and on the flight controller side, in case I need to move it or resolder a wire later on. I'm not just going to make it tight and a perfect fit, so that's what I'm going to do now. Now I'm going to pretend the wire's coming from the flight controller. get that ESC to sit in place while I solder these on, I'm just going to put a temporary piece of black tape over it, tape it to the arm in the spot that I want it. Okay, now I'll just work my way around, keep doing the same thing. On to the motors. Okay, so I attached a motor to the frame with a couple of screws, just thumb tight to get a measurement of what it was going to take to get to the motor to the ESCs. And so then I sort of gauged it out, I cut them off. What I'm going to do is cut all 4 of the motors to this length, strip them, pre-tin them, so that when I attach them to that ESC, it takes me very little time, or it's not as hard to try and cut and strip while the motor's attached to the frame. So I'm going to do it this way, and then I'll basically be done with the motors and ESCs. As you can see, I had to cut the motor wires really short. I cut them, trimmed them, tinned them, and then I just attached them to the ESC like that. And then what I'll do is I'll put the bolts in the motors and then sort of move the ESCs, position them to where I want them to be, but it's a little bit easier to do that. It's a little easier to solder the motors on when they're not connected to the frame. So that's the way I did it. I just got the LED and buzzer combination strip installed. It was a pain in the butt. So here's what I recommend. Before you even start your build, if you're using the Tempest flight controller and you hook up your LED strip and it's not working right, go down to Radio Shack and get yourself one of these, at least a couple, and it's probably handy to have. It's a diode and it's a 1N4007. What happens is my 5-volt pins on my flight controller are putting out 5.25 volts. My LED strip did not like that, so I had to put that diode in line in order to drop the voltage down to under 5 volts. Now when I do that, my LEDs are working. I'm able to program them in Betaflight, do whatever I want to do to them. They weren't working before. It was just giving me random colors. Sometimes they wouldn't turn on, sometimes they would. Took me most of the day today to figure out why. So there's your tip of the day.